This video is on central tendency, which is a type of descriptive statistic. Central tendency includes various measures that help us to understand the center of our data set or what's kind of the norm or what's typical in our data set. And so the first one that we're going to talk about is mode. It's the most frequently occurring value. It's something that you can use for any type of variable. It's less likely that you're going to use it for a continuous or discrete variable that has a lot of options because it's not necessarily as helpful. However, if let's say that you were collecting student test scores and you noticed that in a class of 100 people, you had 90 people who got exactly 90 points out of 100, you would talk about that because that's weird. But other than that, you're typically going to use it for an ordinal variable, like frequencies of school year that I have in this Jamovi output. And you can see that the most frequent response in the counts and the percent column is junior. So that's the mode of school year. And this is again an ordinal variable because it has ordered categories. We can see that there's 20 people who fit the category of junior, which is 55.56% of the total. And so that gives us some interesting information. You can also look at it for nominal variables. And so here we can see that the mode is woman, which again, you would just note as information about your data set, whether it's demographics or some other variable. I don't have an example on here of a interval or ratio variable just because you're just not going to do it as much. You're not going to note the mode unless it really has some kind of meaning in the context of your study. The median is the literal middle value. So you can think of it as if you were to line up everyone. Let's say that we lined everybody up by their age. It would be the person that's in the middle of that line. And so this is calculated very simply. It's just you can line up your values in order and it's the center value. Fortunately, we're going to again be using Jamovi. It's just going to go ahead and find that for us. You can use it for ordinal and for interval or ratio variables, but not nominal variables. And so this is also particularly helpful for interval ratio, or we treat them as continuous. So I'm gonna say continuous because it tells us about the actual center. And sometimes that's really helpful if you have, for example, outliers in your data set. Like if I were to look at income in the United States, uh, if I said what the average was, what the arithmetic average, which we'll talk about next, the mean, if I said that that was $50,000 a year, but then that includes like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, that's not a good representation of the middle. So we would actually want to look at the median because it's the actual middle of the data set. And I'll come back to this idea. This cannot be done for nominal variables because there is no order in nominal variables. Take gender, for example. If we were looking at man, woman, non-binary, then that we don't have a natural order for those things. And so we would not be able to find a middle value. The last measure of central tendency here is the mean. That's just where you add all the variables up together and divide it by the total number of cases. So this, I almost think of it as like the fairness calculation. So if I was going to say I have 100 extra credit points, and I handed half to one person and then half to another person, but I still had 20 something people that didn't get any extra credit points, I should add that together, divide it by the total number of people in class, and distribute that to everyone equally. That would be what the mean is. And so again, you'll use Jamovi to calculate this, but the problem with the mean is that it's influenced by extreme scores. So going back to the example of income in the United States, if I were to calculate the mean, so if I were to add everybody's annual income together and divide it by the total number of people, there's problems there because we have a lot of we have quite a few outliers. We have quite a few billionaires and millionaires who are going to pull that mean up. So they're going to add to that total in this top part right here, because this is the sum of X. So if we add everybody together and we have a bunch of I'm going to say normal salary ranges or low salary ranges. And then we have these really, really extreme scores. That's all going to go into this top portion. And then when we divide it by the number of people, it's going to be like, oh, hey, everybody's making a lot of money. And so that mean can be misleading. So that's where the median can come in handy. Now, you can do the mean for interval or ratio variables, or we're going to say continuous because that's how um, we treat a lot of our Likert type scales and things in psychology. We're going to treat them as if it's a number, a meaningful number, we're going to treat it as continuous in Jamovi. And so you want to think about when you're looking at your variables, you want to think about the type of variable first. So if you say, oh, it's continuous or it's interval ratio, then you know you can calculate the mean. You can also get a median and you can get the mode, but it's not as helpful. Um, and so then you want to think about, well, what does the data look like? So what's the distribution of the data? That's the next step. And so you want to think about are there outliers? Are there multiple modes? Are there multiple high points in the data? And as an example, I'm using the social loafing data set that I have in other videos. So here I have the distribution. You can see that these are scores for social loafing along the x-axis right here. And then this density, this is actually when we look at the height of these columns, this is just representing frequency. And it's listed as density. It's just a Jamovi thing. And I'll talk more about this density plot that is this line, but I'm just kind of showing you generally what this distribution looks like. So here we have, and I'm going to clear this off. Here we have the mean is 9.63. So that's like right here. So this is the mean, 9.63. And then the median is actually 9. It's not a huge difference. I'll say this is 9, so I'm going to draw it right halfway through. There's 9. So this is the median, so I'll say MED. All right. And so what we're saying is that this median right here, that means that this is 50% of the responses. And then from here to here is 50% of the responses. And you can just see looking at that this is a much bigger distance. It's much more spread out on the higher scores of social loafing. And we do have a little bit, it's not a technical outlier, but we have a little bit of a high score that's kind of on its own. What's happening is that our mean is higher than our median because these high scores are grabbing onto this and pulling it that direction. So it's skewed to the right or positively skewed. And so talking about the median could add some context. This isn't an extreme case, but there are other situations where the mean would not be a good representation of the center. So for example, if this data set, I got the mean of 9.63, but then my median was only 2, I'd be like, whoa, what's going on here? That's super weird. And so you just make that decision. But again, generally speaking, you use the mode most frequently for ordinal and nominal variables. You use the median for ordinal, and then sometimes for interval or ratio variables. And then the mean you're only going to use for interval or ratio variables. There are people who do the mean for ordinal variables. It's just not something that I do. And so for my class, I do not want you to get the mean of ordinal variables because it's not technically a meaningful number. And I know we're doing Likert type scales, but that's different. And I will explain why in a different video or in class. So that's all I have on the central tendency measures. And then I want you to picture that going into the next video on variation, you should talk about the center of the data And then if you are able to talk about variation, so if it's ordinal or interval or ratio, you're going to talk about variability. You want to talk about those together. So this is really focusing on the similarities in the data set and where the center typically is or what's typical in a data set, the norm. And then the next video, we're going to talk about how data sets are different. And that's what measures of variability are.